Thanks. It was wonderful and brilliant. And as I indicated earlier, I haven't read Simondon as much as I would like yet, so this was perfect for me at least.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. I was interested in terms of the 5 terms you brought out at the end for reflexive technology. What you thought about agency in relation to this. I think it was in the paper earlier about algorithmic governmentality. There was a comment, if I heard rightly and understood correctly, about critique also needing to elaborate the subject of critique, or subject position from which the critique would emerge. And I'm not so sure about that. And I was just wondering whether for you that you feel that it's necessary to elaborate some kind of agency that that would be the subject to elaborate this kind of critique for the networks, or whether actually those 5, was it 5? From top to Metreon, whatever it was, whether those are actually all things that we need to posit in order to, if you like, give the conditions of the agents we would like to emerge, ideally. So rather than needing to elaborate an agency of critique, actually all we need to do is think in the way you've done and give the conditions for the type of subjects we want to emerge from individuations in the future.
I mean, I guess what I was thinking was, when I came up with those, and they are quite random. Well, they're not random, but I've worked through Simondon and they recur. And it seemed to me that maybe if we're going to, as it were, argue for Technics, which I think Simondon does, we need to try and be clear about what we want from contemporary technology. And I think these words can help us articulate that. So whether they're just useful terms for activists to use, or whether they're terms for pedagogical purposes, but I've not really thought through that so much, or they're terms that can be, arguments can be made politically using them, I guess is what I came here just trying to think about what kind of politics of technology would be Simondonian, really, or could be in harmony with Simondon, and that was just one of the ideas I had. As I said, I'm not taking it that far, to be honest with you. This is all quite fresh in my mind, fresh development. Sorry if that doesn't answer your question.
No, it does. I liked what you were doing, and talk more, but
in a way, I kind of brought it here just for people to give me feedback on what they think, whether it's viable or insane, or
Continuing from what Ian just said, I think the interesting thing is that if you really want to think technology in a positive way, or adding these characteristics or keywords, kind of linking them to technology, you really need to rethink like the classic mode of critique. Because it's not the distance between me judging something that is not connected with me is gone. And I think you need to rethink a mode of critique that functions very different, and that maybe it's a bit linked to what I said earlier, that I have the feeling the classic cultural critique, which is the position I judge this piece of work, really doesn't function very well. And I have the feeling that you yourself practice this new different mode, which is somehow more connected to experimentization.
Yeah.
And that is a different agency. There's still an agency, but it's not an agency of an autonomous subject that acts, but it's a co-trans individual, so to speak, acting. But you try, does work, it doesn't work, but there's still an action going on. So I think you actually performed yourself the answer.
Trying to maybe draw out what kind of values for technology are possible, and what would we like.
And it's very tough, I think, to do that.
Can I just add a very brief what was behind my question was by no means any criticism of what you're doing. It was a criticism of some theory that seems to think if only we can theorise our subjectivity and our agency properly, that's what we need to do. Just get it right, and everything will be fine. And actually, that's what you were doing. Since you
Yeah,
were,
no, okay.
as
Sorry,
Mercedes just said, you were sort of performing a certain kind of agency, and then saying these will be the conditions for the agents we need in the future. So,
yeah, no, you're right. And I guess my frustration was, especially maybe with what I've read of Stiegler, and I'm not a Stiegler expert, so I don't want to upset you at all, but the tendency of what I've read of Stiegler's later work, it does tend to be on the side of social political thought, as you say, or the subject, and maybe not so much dealing with invention of technologies to change that. Although I was discussing with you earlier your work on trying to create a different social network, which is exactly the kind of thing I guess would fit in with what I was talking about. So, maybe I was being a bit harsh on Stiegler, so I apologise if that's the case. But I guess the frustration I also feel with more in medium communication is that it always focuses on the individual subject or so-called culture, and very rarely takes, and the answers always come from, discussions about power or culture or representation, and they never seem to involve the actual physical material technologies that we use and what norms are inherent in them, and what we want, and how they could be normatively more amenable to the kind of things that Simondon's looking for, which is, invention. If that makes sense.
Sebastian.
And I think the point you said also exists kind of this notion that we have everybody has to learn technologies and what do, and that's I'm very sympathetic towards your answer there that might not be the right way, or that's still like a very individual, saw very individually. And I was just thinking, there's this niche artist, I think it's called Nick Bruce, I think his name. He also has kind of he has kind of the same idea of like people have to engage in technology and they have to understand it, or they have to learn with it. But on the same time, he doesn't mean understanding in the sense of like you have to learn coding and you have to learn the right way to do it. But you should just experiment with it, and then in that way also kind of see where it kind of doesn't work, where it fails, where maybe there's some limits to like how you can use those kind of softwares. And I was just thinking if that might be something you would think goes more in kind of this engagement with, or that could be a kind of engagement with technology that might be positive and not kind of this restrictive, and might go also to this idea of experimentation as a mode of critique.
I mean, I do teach coding and practice-based media, so I do kind of try and steer students towards that kind of experimentation. So, and I do think there's a valid place for that. I think when I was reading Simondon, talking about technical reflexivity though, it's talking about the different modes of causality in that, and that's fantastic. And I obviously agree with what he says about technical schemas. But the frustration I guess I had, or the problem I had, was with the kind of contemporary technologies we're talking about. It's hard to maybe describe what technical schemas are when you're coming against algorithms, and and I guess what I was searching for was a set of words that maybe expressed more what we wanted, how we wanted those kind of techniques to perform, I guess. So it's essentially what, I mean, I'm not in line with what Simondon was doing, which was describing technical schemas, but I'm trying to draw out maybe some of the qualities that we want from technology in that sense. So I appreciate that I'm maybe not being entirely Simondonian here.
I've got a couple of hands, but
Yeah, you
introduce us to sort of a general phenomenology of the spirit, right?
Yeah.
Because
No.
it's scientific, aesthetic, ethical, philosophical, and then trans-individual.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
No, I think I mentioned earlier the McLuhan-esque thing, and it's Hegelian. I've said this to me the other day. I guess what I'm just trying to do, I'm just fascinated by that chapter in Simondon, and I think it's an amazing chapter. And I think actually really the way he sets up Technics against religion, I think is unique and very productive. But yeah, it's open to critique. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But I was just thought it would be kind of interesting to try and think it further. That's all. I'm not trying to make claims, but you're right. It's very Hegelian in spirit. I think
it's interesting because I mean we are engaged in task to address the question of historicity of humanity. So, and it's very difficult to do it without kind of a teleological.
I mean, the other academic who I haven't mentioned at all is Kittler, of course, in media. Who's again, it's not really influential in the British context particularly, but you know, you can marry Kittler up with this as well. And, you know, and I mentioned Eagleton and Perniola. They all tell these stories, so as you say, you know, you have to attempt these things maybe. Well, maybe you don't.
I want to ask you about the difference between the inter-individual and the trans-individual.
Okay.
And how you think, I mean, I don't know, just if you haven't thought about it, that's even better.
It's quite possible.
It just came to me. But in terms of thinking about what reflexive technologies are, is there a way in which that distinction either works within reflexive technologies, particularly if we're thinking about the digital?
I mean, I guess you could apply it to things like Facebook and things like that as kind of individual, you know, as a constructed, purposed description of, you know, the limitation for describing yourself in these environments is very limited for the purposes of advertising, isn't it? And
would there be a?
I guess it's possible to think.
I guess in order to link Simondon to contemporary technologies, is there? I mean, I'm trying to think, and I can't. Is there something that Simondon says about the difference between those two types of representation of the social? That's too reductive, but anyway, that's kind of what it is. That would, in a way, orient a Simondonian approach to technology in order, almost to give you a kind of criterion of, again, it's very reductive, good and bad, reflexive and humanitarian techniques. I don't know.
The people using technologies in their everyday life in a standardized, unreflective way, I guess, would be one response to that. I don't know, I've not really thought that through, I'll be honest with you. But it's an interesting thing that I need to consider, actually. I'm sorry, I can't.
No, but it's
off the top of my head. I'll think about, maybe I'll talk to you later about it and see if we can come up with something. Maybe together we can invent something.
Thank you very much for this and this chapter is a chapter that I read many times because it's very extremely interesting and very speculative. But when I was reading this chapter, I mean, that was how I developed the concept of cosmotechnic and the whole book dedicated to that. I become really very ambivalent about this. On the one hand, it presents a universal history.
Yeah.
And this universal history, of course, Hegelian, but not only Hegelian, but it's also Kantian.
Yeah.
So we can't talk about universal history. And when you talk about the reflexivity, and this reflexive technology, of course, it's also we can also refer it to this kind of reflexive nature in Kant. When Kant said that the realization of the universal history is the hidden project of nature. Exactly. So there is a kind of realization of its reflexivity. So the reflexivity of nature is implemented in culture or technology. So on the one hand, it shows a kind of enlightenment idea of history. That's something I found it quite problematic in order to impose such a scheme. Of course, we know that there's a debate between Forte and also Herder, and I think I'm more on the side of Herder.
Okay.
Well, the second thing is, however, this presents also something very interesting for me, is, and that Simondon has emphasized, but maybe that is not clear in this scheme, is the question of cosmology.
Okay.
And because you present it like this, but actually there are arrows. There are arrows because it seems like there is a linear, but actually it is not linear. Because in every stage there is always a return. There is a return to the magic phase. And this is something very peculiar, very strange. Why Simondon wanted to go back to this kind of unity? Of course, going back to this unity doesn't mean that going back to the magic phase.
No.
You know, that's a primitive society. By going back to the unity is there is a kind of reflexivity here, and going back to unity seems to me presupposes the cosmological thinking that is not elaborated by Simondon. So I think that is for me this is always a very interesting way to think about this, and what could be developed further.
Yeah.
Whether two lines, you would say one, which is to think about what kind of technology is possible for the future. But when we were talking, I saw big land.
Jesus Christ! Well, that's me finished.
And then you mentioned Peter Dew, you know.
I'm not sure how to respond to that. Yeah, but it's fascinating, and I will certainly be reading your book on cosmology. I mentioned the McLuhan-esque, the kind of Catholic sense of redemption that also is involved here, and I wonder if that's part of where this comes from. Again, it's speculation. It's Hegel. I mean, there's lots of different ways. Did you want to say something?
You mentioned at the end that this leads out towards this sort of new techniques and new cultures, leads out towards new humanisms, and I think that's really interesting. But when I was reading Simondon, just refreshing some readings as I was before coming here, I was sort of he mentions that the techniques create an external artificial environment through which we then evolve within. And when he's saying things like that, I'm thinking, wow, it's kind of post-humanism or something, and that when you start to maybe when you start to take control of that, or when you start to bridge the gap between culture and techniques, I just wondered if there's a kind of Prometheanism or something that is that Simondon leads out towards a kind of Prometheanism or a post-humanism or something. I guess does the human only change in mentality with regards to techniques, or is it kind of like by adopting the right attitude towards technology, we change in a way that makes us remain human even as we change or something? I don't know. Why did you use the word new humanism?
Very simply, in Simondon, he connects new humanism to new forms of alienation that comes from technology, and with technical change there always comes new forms of alienation, and one of the responses to that is that you need new humanism to I think he says every age has its humanism or its alienation that responded to with a humanism. So that was really all I meant by that, to be honest with you. Although it's true that you could connect Simondon to post-humanism. I mean, if you want to understand post-humanism as going beyond the traditional humanistic understanding of what the human is, because he's, as has been discussed earlier, he's attempts not to be anthropological. You know, he doesn't see any kind of essence to the human. He tries to maintain this. Whether he's successful or not is up for debate. But you could understand that as a form of a new humanism. That he's in early on that kind of way of thinking about the human. You know, 1958 or whatever, and he's already thinking in those terms, as well as trying to link himself, I think, to that Enlightenment project, but reforming it or to modernism. And so he's a fascinating figure for the different connections that he has. But yeah.
I wanted to bring us back to our first discussions about progress that we had on the first day.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that effectively this kind of flow chart. No, first of all, just thank you so much. You had my attention all the way through, and I think the speculative gesture of reading Simondon is wonderful and very Simondonian. And I was wondering if you redrew this slightly to think what is, if you think of this as a system of simultaneity, what would be the opposite of magic? Would be alienation. So it would be the fully finished individual that is dead and that has fallen, that has experienced a déphasage and that is no longer part of the rest. I'm just speculating here with you guys, so bear with me. In which case, it's rather than thinking of a kind of iteration, and even less a linear one from one phase to the next, it isn't even dialectical in the Hegelian sense, but it literally builds one on top of the other.
Yeah, I mean,
which I think is a risk with Simondon, with some of his metaphors that he uses. Instead of thinking of it this way, you could have this idea of phases of individuation that tend towards saturation and trying to understand what is that phase that we're living now. But it doesn't mean that we are not also having magical behaviors and not also having religious components in our lives that, if neglected, become clearly very extremely problematical. That we don't also have artisanal needs, like tinkering, even with algorithms and with new technologies. Hacking and tinkering, I think, is a kind of artisanal attitude probably to what our digital...
No, and I think you alluded to that earlier when he said that things return and come back. So it's obviously a simplification.